Darktrace has been in the news recently thanks to them discovering some particularly nasty malware called AutoColor that is being installed on infrastructure via a vulnerability in the SAP NetWeaver server. To discuss this further, we're bringing onto the show Nathaniel Jones, who's the VP of Threat Research and AI Strategy at Darktrace. He's also a field CISO there. Nathaniel, thanks so much for coming onto the show. We really appreciate you coming and spending the time with us.
Thanks very much, Mackenzie. Nice to join. I appreciate the opportunity.
So I'm going to kind of dive straight into it. The reason why I was so excited to kind of bring you onto the show is that you're obviously working for Darktrace, and Darktrace has been in the news a little bit about some of the discoveries that they found, some particularly nasty malware being rolled out via some vulnerabilities. So maybe we just start with a little bit of context. You know, what actually happened? What did you guys discover out there being exploited in the wild?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. We're here to talk about sort of AutoColor in terms of the malware and the sophistication, but also how it exploited SAP NetWeaver, that vulnerability that hit maybe late April, early May-ish. And so, yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it was really interesting because we saw detections about a week before the vulnerability was disclosed, but also the exploitation of that vulnerability after as well, sort of a natural story. And then, yeah, just the way our detection worked as well.
So how did you guys first actually detect this? Because, you know, there's a lot happening out there in various different states. So how did Darktrace actually kind of understand that something was wrong with both SAP and also we'll get into the malware itself a bit later on. But let's start with, how did you first discover like kind of something was up?
Yeah, sure. So the first few things were we had a couple of our models or detections go off and due to an anomalous connection to an OIST site, which is quite common. And then we had a couple of alerts across our SOC and MDR that sort of came through, and our team started investigating from that. And then we saw an unusual ELF download from a rare IP. So we saw a few different anomalous connections and then a file download, and then saw subsequent activity after that. Our team sort of extended the sort of containment of those actions. And then we kind of investigated after we sort of stopped it in its place.
I mean, it is very interesting. I think anyone that kind of has worked in a SOC or been in a SOC, you get all of these alerts all the times from various different things. There's never, and I think people that probably haven't had this experience may not know, is that you don't get an alert to say, there's a breach happening.
Yeah.
There's all these little things that together paint a picture. But there's no era of certainty in it. And I think that's kind of what you're like touching on there too, is there's lots of different things kind of coming together that pointed to the fact that, okay, something's not quite right here. Let's move on to kind of the actual vulnerability. So the malware that was used is called AutoColor. We'll get into that, but to be able to deliver this malware, which is particularly nasty, the attackers first need to get into a foothold. So there was kind of a vulnerability in SAP NetWeaver. For any nerds out there, we're talking about 2025 31324.
Yep.
If you want the CVE number, just Google it.
Love
But let's have a look. What is this vulnerability that's in SAP NetWeaver?
I love that you list the CVE because I was going to do that for you if you weren't. So definitely nerding out. Important to have that right because there's a few. Yeah, I mean, SAP NetWeaver SAP has been exploited before. It's in CISA's KEV. We know it's a technology that people are interested in. In this case, NetWeaver is sort of an internet-facing naturally, so that sort of brings attention for people to understand that technology. In this case, it was a remote code execution sort of vulnerability and a CVSS score of 10. So essentially, I also had a problem with sort of authentication authorization, but without getting into too much detail, essentially you could just write a command remotely and write a command and have it sort of process, inject, or sort of take over the machine from that.
It's not often you see a 10. Like often you see like a 9.8 or something.
Yeah.
But like a 10 is basically like worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Why was this one kind of considered so dangerous? Like in terms of this vulnerability, what attributes kind of gave it that 10? Is it just that it's remote code execution? Is it that it was kind of unauthenticated? Like what gives it that perfect score?
Yeah.
If you could call it that.
Yeah, true. I think from the fact that it's internet facing is a challenge. The fact that you have remote code execution, so you could do it from anywhere. is a challenge. I think being able to do full system compromise that quickly, you had exploitation before the vulnerability was actually listed and then put out into disclosure and then into CVSS Kev. And the fact that you had exploitation after that. The POC, I think, the proof of concept code, I think was a day, maybe two, before it actually got out there. So you had quite a few natural interest parties, and then it just sort of exploded from there.
Yeah, because I mean, once you have that proof of concept on GitHub or wherever it is, then it's just a field day. One of the interesting things is when these vulnerabilities are actually exploited in the wild, there's a lot of very severe vulnerabilities out there that never get exploited in the wild because the exploit chain is very long or whatever it may be. In your opinion, do you think the attackers were kind of targeting specific companies, like looking for vulnerabilities, or were they kind of doing wide-scale scanning to try and find this version of SAP NetWeaver? Like, was it targeting the version of NetWeaver that was vulnerable, or do you think it was targeting specific companies?
Yeah, I think both. So first, we did see probably scanning widely because they're looking for that specific type of server. I think that happened probably after the CV, or at least from our telemetry, after the CV was announced and then disclosed and the POC became available. Before that, we saw activity that I thought would match with specific targeting. Any APT worth its salt that is going to be using that for operations, they're going to get into the targets for either espionage or industrial property theft or whatever their sort of national security goals are. So both.
Yeah. So you've mentioned the APT. I was going to ask this question later on, but as you've mentioned it, I'm going to throw it in there now.
Yeah.
So advanced persistent threat, kind of state-sponsored actors. This is who you believe is behind this type of attack. This isn't like opportunistic script kiddies. You believe that this is coming from a larger scale, more sophistication.
It seems to point that way. I mean, we're not the only ones that thought that maybe some of the pre-CVE sort of activity was nation-state related. It matched with, I think, Palo Alto and a couple others, maybe Relia Media, or Relia Quest rather. So I think the combination of the targeting, who the victims were, the fact that they're using a 0-day plus the sort of AutoColor backdoor, the nature of it points to some sort of well-resourced sort of adversary.
You've mentioned AutoColor there. We've danced around it a lot.
Yeah.
So let's dive into the juicy part. So AutoColor, it's specific malware. So what is this kind of, like, they've found the vulnerability, they've been able to get in, they've unloaded this AutoColor malware. What is this malware? What makes it so kind of dangerous?
I think there's a few things, so I'll have to rattle maybe 5 of them. But for background, I think it came out like late 2024. It's a Linux malware, which is not that common, comparatively speaking, particularly if you think about like Android. But when executed, it checks if it has root privileges first. And then if it has root, then it proceeds to install sort of a malicious object and modifies a Linux file that essentially allows you to sort of force it into separate libraries, which just expands into every process. I think those few things, plus the malware is hidden in a directory that sort of mimics logs, which is also interesting. I think the fourth thing would be that it uses encrypted strings and dynamic API resolution to avoid static detection, which is also points to the challenge of having signature-based detection. But then also it uses a custom encryption algorithm for outbound communication. So those are 5 things that I rattled off that might be a little too intense for the crowd, but those are 5 things that you're like, oof, wow, nice.
Yeah, I know. Like you touched on a really good point there of like signature-based detection. Is that how we detect most of these things is basically by identifying a hash or something of what we know is malicious software. But we're in this new era where we're kind of polymorphic malware is a term that kind of gets thrown around, but it's basically like signature-based malware is becoming more and more obsolete. Yeah. So it's getting harder and harder to detect. So how like we can't, it's 2025. We can't mention the podcast without talking about AI. So let's dive into this. I know that Darktrace is kind of on the frontiers with kind of using AI to help detect this. We talked a little bit at the start about how you detect it, but what specifically kind of role did AI play in helping uncover this, and how's it going to help us in the future?
Sure. I guess just for AutoColor's particular sort of stealth and how we were able to sort of capture it. One, the hard-coded IP means that the hash is different for each file, so making that signature sort of much harder to use if you're trying to get a roll-up of those different indicators of compromise. So I think that on top of the Linux malware, on top of the anomalous sort of connections outbound, we thought that was interesting. From an AI perspective, it's from us, we sort of apply AI to sort of the business data, and we sort of avoid any sort of threat actor centric behavior. We try to learn that and use it to sort of bubble up different anomalies. So if we think Mackenzie, okay, we understand his data, and on top of that, we apply a series of machine algorithms or sort of unsupervised machine learning from controlled supervised perspective, but also we deploy math like Bayesian math. So different types, I think, provide that sort of anomaly score, and then that'll sort of raise up into different categories for you. And then we use our AI analyst, which we've trained on our SOC, to sort of help piece together different bits of those anomalies. And then that helps provide sort of the SOC human, in this case, our analyst, to see it. So in this case, cyber analyst pulled 2 or 3 different sort of incidents around what was happening across that environment. And then we saw it from that perspective. What's interesting around the AutoColor backdoor, we talked about it in terms of stealth and sort of the cool things. What also is cool is if it doesn't get that immediate C2 connection and it tries to sort of perform the kill chain, then it'll just go benign. And it looks very benign and it sits within logs. So just the functionality of it, I think, was interesting, and the use of AI to detect that was pretty cool.
Have you guys kind of seen this malware in other areas? So right now we're talking about kind of the chain of going through the SAP vulnerability and installing it there. Have you kind of seen it in kind of other areas as well? Is this being used more and more by kind of threat actors, APTs?
I have not seen it that much, to be honest. I know it came out late 2024, so about a year ago, but it was mainly targeting sort of governments, a little education institutions across particularly Asia, Southeast Asia, and the U.S. For us, I think ours was around a U.S. chemical plant. So that was interesting from our perspective. Does that fall in line with targeting critical infrastructure? Yes. By maybe an East Asian APT? Yes. But broader than that, I can't really comment in terms of attribution because we don't have enough telemetry and we're pretty threat agnostic. The whole anomaly-based detection thing.
So you've mentioned there the kind of the victim in this. It was a U.S. chemical company.
Yeah.
Classic kind of target for an APT, this type of organization.
Yeah.
This may be getting into a little bit of speculation, so perhaps maybe we can't go down this path. But what do you think the threat actors were like trying to achieve in all of this? Was it disruption, stealing of information, moving laterally? What is it? Did you notice anything? I mean, you stopped it pretty quickly, but did you notice anything there or have any ideas about what was trying to be done here?
Without speculating too much, we do know APTs sort of go it for twofold: industrial espionage, but also just espionage, and some of the targets that we saw or that were observed in East Asia and the U.S. From our perspective, at least from the chemical factory, you would probably assume that they're looking for either two ones. One, they're using as a proxy to sort of obfuscate other attacks, or two, that they want to hold that organization or entity at systemic risk to sort of change the calculus of the U.S. And also just sort of maintain that as a threat to critical infrastructure.
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but there is probably something that a lot of people listening want to know. And I guess there's kind of two parts to this. Is one, if you're running SAP NetWeaver as a server, like what should you do? What can you do to kind of help prevent that?
Yeah.
And I guess kind of the other part is kind of what can we do to prevent this kind of new era of malware? But let's start with SAP NetWeaver. What if you're running this service? What should you do? Is it fundamentally unsafe? Is it safe to use? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fundamentally safe to use. I think vulnerabilities happen. So you just need to think about, okay, if you're not going to use something that bypasses signature detection, what else can you use within your stack to sort of provide that security posture? From SAP NetWeaver specifically, I would go straight to SAP's website. make sure you actually patch the servers. And then patch management is easy on a vendor, harder on an operator because of downtime, right? Just the natural thing. The other thing would be, segmentation of vulnerable systems. So if the internet facing and by design, they're internet facing, then you want to have a little bit more control. And segmentation, micro-segmentation is important there.
And what about from like the AutoColor perspective and these new threats of malware? If someone's out there kind of you're as you said, vulnerabilities happen. Yeah. They're always going to happen. It's not it's not a sign of, poor software. It's just a sign of popular software, basically, that you have these vulnerabilities. But so you can't completely prevent the fact that perhaps someone can get a foothold in. What can you do about preventing these kind of new era, let's call it, of malware, of things like AutoColor and whatever's going to come after AutoColor?
You're making me think about the, I think it's called Lame Hug, the malware that came out from Ukraine around Russia, sort of a newer sort of malware, and then it called out to a Chinese-based LLM. And sort of incorporating AI into malware attacks is definitely a scary thought, right? Typically, you're thinking Gen AI or sort of phishing, and we're seeing a lot of that in terms of phishing. It's been interesting to sort of watch it happen. It's also been really cool from a defensive perspective to apply AI in this new era around that was a very sophisticated malware, but we picked it up. And we not only picked it up through the different algorithms and cyber AI analysts, but the analyst was able to sort of get that feed from sort of all that different AI and make a good defensive decision. So for me, that's cool.
Definitely. And I think that's great to kind of see. It gives me hope that they're out, that you guys are out there. And it's even great to kind of see it in action, because Black Hat has just finished. I don't know if you were there and if you walked around the vendor hall, but everyone is making wildly bold claims about AI. There. But it's great to see it in action, actually stopping something in the wild, being used in that, not just theoretical, right?
No, exactly. You're seeing it in practice. We do it every day. It's really fun.
Well, Nathaniel, thanks so much for your time. I won't take you for too much longer, but it's been fascinating. Thanks for sharing your findings too. There is links to the blog post that Darktrace did, as well as some news articles in the links of this. So if you want to find out more, you can click down that. But Nathaniel, thanks so much for coming on the show, and hope to have you back sometime.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mackenzie.